Kremlin is warning Ukraine's declaration of martial law over Russia's seizure of 3 Ukrainian ships might trigger a flare-up in hostilities in eastern Ukraine. Adil Hurd is following this story.
Russia and Ukraine have blamed each other for Sunday's confrontation in the Kerch Strait. On Sunday, near Crimea, Russian border guards rammed into and opened fire on 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels traveling from the Black Sea toward a Ukrainian port. The Russians seized the ships and their crews.
I believe that it is actually a desire for Putin to show who's in control of Crimea.
And Steve Weber, CBN's regional director for Russia and Ukraine, believes the Russian action was also a response to the decision by the leader of the Orthodox Church to take Orthodox parishes in Ukraine away from the Russian Patriarch in Moscow.
It could be connected to what happened just a few weeks ago when this Bartholomew in Istanbul, with a stroke of the pen, took 12,000, a third of all of the churches under the Moscow Patriarch, and gave them to the Ukrainian Patriarch. This created anger in Putin. It's like you lost power over all of these, a third of his parishes.
It's viewed in Russia as further Ukrainian separation from the control of Moscow. The decision and the ramming incident could reignite the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and was condemned at the United Nations by the U.S. and its allies. The Ukrainian parliament Monday imposed martial law for 30 days, something Ukraine didn't do even when Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 or sent troops into eastern Ukraine. This could also be about politics. Putin's popularity is said to be falling, and Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko faces re-election. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Across to honor World War I veterans is at risk of being removed. Here with more on the efforts to keep it where it stands in Bladensburg, Maryland, is Mike Berry with First Liberty. So, Mike, give us a status on the legal wranglings of the cross right now.
Well, the Supreme Court recently announced that it's going to hear this case in what's likely to be the first big blockbuster case of the year and of the term. And so this case pits, like you said, a World War I Veterans Memorial against the American Humanist Association, who is fighting to have this memorial torn down.
History about the memorial. This is a rare tribute to World War I veterans, correct?
That's right. It was put up almost 100 years ago. Partially funded by mothers of 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., who lost their sons in World War I. And they put this memorial up to honor those who served and sacrificed in World War I. It stood there untouched for almost 100 years. And like I said, the American Humanist Association filed a lawsuit to have it torn down. First Liberty Institute, along with the American Legion, is fighting to preserve this and obviously many other veterans memorials across our country from these types of legal attacks.
That said, why is this a critical and important case to win?
Well, from the human perspective, it's important that we preserve the memories of those who've served and sacrificed for our freedoms, particularly those who served in World War I and really any conflict on behalf of the United States. And from a legal perspective, it's really important that the court take this case as it did to clear up the confusion around the First Amendment and whether the First Amendment requires us to tear down these veterans memorials or whether the First Amendment will continue to protect and honor those who've served, and the ability for people like the American Legion and millions of Americans to honor service members who have served and sacrificed on our behalf.
People who are interested in getting involved, what would you say to them?
Well, the easiest way is to go to firstliberty.org, or you can go to don'ttearmedown.com, and there you can find out more about the history of these veterans memorials. You can find out about the 49 men who served and died in World War I, and you can learn about how you can support First Liberty in our effort to protect not only the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, but veterans memorials that are all across the country that are coming under attack. So again, that's firstliberty.org.
Good. Give us a bit of a timeline in terms of how soon you expect things to begin unfolding more here.
Well, actually, we have just begun the briefing process. So we're going to be submitting our briefs to the Supreme Court, arguing the legality of this and the constitutionality of this memorial. And we expect that the court will probably have an oral argument in this sometime in the late winter, early spring of 2019. So people should definitely stay tuned for those blockbuster arguments sometime early in 2019.
All right, we'll be watching indeed. Mike Berry, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The Supreme Court has given a property rights victory. The nation's highest court ruled unanimously in the case of Weyerhaeuser versus the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Justice determined that the government overstepped its bounds by declaring 1,500 acres of private land in Louisiana as a critical habitat for a frog that questionably can't even survive there. CBN News reported on the case. Property owner Edward Poitevin called the initial move unrealistic.
It's over 1,500 acres, almost double the size of Central Park in New York, and it would take millions and millions and millions of dollars to recreate that habitat.
Poitevin now says the nation's highest court not only had his back, but the backs of all American landowners in that decision. The federal government released its newest comprehensive report on climate change and its effects. Our Mark Martin joins us now live in the newsroom with more on this. Mark.
From according to NPR, the government report blames humans for climate change. It also says the actions of people make wildfires, extreme rainfall, floods, and droughts worse. In addition, the temperature of the 48 contiguous states are nearly 2 degrees warmer than 100 years ago. The water that surrounds these states is around 9 inches higher. Also, heat waves take place more often and are a lot more intense. Evangelical Christian Catherine Hayhoe of Texas Tech's Climate Science Center spoke with NPR about the report. She says the main reason she and others care about climate change is because it takes the risks we already face and makes them worse. CBN News also spoke with Hayhoe a few years ago.
When we burn coal and oil and natural gas, it releases that carbon trapped in those fuels into the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, we already have this amazing natural blanket that God has designed for our planet that keeps us almost 60 degrees warmer than we would be otherwise. When putting all that extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're adding to that blanket. We're overheating. That's what we're doing to our planet.
In her interview with NPR, Hayhoe says we can avoid the worst impacts if we act now, and she says the report explains that very clearly. NPR reports that the Trump administration doesn't agree entirely with the climate change report. Ephraim?
Mark, Catherine Hayhoe is an evangelical Christian. Some might think because of her stance on climate change, she leans to the left. Is that the case?
Actually, our CBN News report from 2015 described her as having conservative leanings, which might surprise many of our viewers. Many conservative Christians don't agree that humans help cause climate change or that people can affect the Earth's warming or cooling. Ephraim?
All right, Mark, thank you for that report. The global economy, tax cuts, deregulation, and job training. Those were among the issues raised at the first White House press briefing in 2 months. Larry Kudlow, National Economic Council Director, talked about China and tariffs. Our chief political correspondent, David Brody, is an analyst and joins us now from Washington with more on this. So, David, what do you think about Kudlow's comments on making a trade deal with China and no more tariffs?
Right. Well, Ephraim, it doesn't surprise me. We do hear now from the president through Larry Kudlow that he believes, he being the president, thinks there's a good opportunity for a deal to be made. And we also understand that there'll be a dinner between President Trump and President Xi of China at the G20 in Argentina. And so this is some new news coming out of the briefing today. Now, whether or not a deal can be struck is a whole nother matter. I will say this, that remember, there's about $500 billion of goods that we get in from China. Already a tariff is on about half of that, $250 billion. Here's the key to all of this, Ephraim. The president says if there's not a deal that he can strike with China before January 1st, then the rest of that money, about $267 billion, which would take it to over $500 billion, all of it will be tax coming in from China. There'll be a tariff on it. And it wouldn't be just a 10% tariff that it is now. It would be 25%. So that's the bargaining chip by this president at the dinner in Argentina coming up this weekend.
That said, how likely do you think it is that China can strike a trade deal to benefit both?
Well, I guess we're going to wait and see. I mean, look, China's, at least according to Larry Kudlow today at the briefing, his words now, he says that China's economy is in a bit of a slump. Of course, we know America's economy doing pretty well. And so obviously it's all about bargaining position. So you would think, at least the White House would think, that China is in a mood to bargain at this point. I don't know about that. But I will say this, that one of the things that the administration is going to be looking for is to make sure that there is some sort of deal on intellectual property. Because remember, right now, if an American company is over in China, they basically have to sign an agreement to give their intellectual property, in other words, the way they do their business, the way they take care of their products from an intellectual standpoint, they have to give that to China. And Donald Trump says, wait, what? What in the world? So that'll be part of the negotiations.
Well, David, we said earlier that this is the first White House press briefing in 2 months. Why such a long time between briefings?
Well, let's dial this back for a moment. This may be the first briefing in a couple of months, but this just in, Ephraim, the Trump administration doesn't do things like other administrations. Have you heard? And indeed, that's what's happened because this president has actually been very accessible to the media, holding scrums, if you will, outside the White House as he goes to Air Force One almost on a daily basis now. And so they've been hearing quite a bit from the president. Not just that, but Sarah Sanders clearly will take her opportunities to do briefings when the White House feels that they want to do briefings. And today, quite frankly, she didn't just show up in the briefing room, but they brought the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and Larry Kudlow has been talking about.
Coming up, a missionary's death brings attention to the dangers of taking the gospel to the nations. Welcome back to CBN News Watch. The missions group that sent missionary John Chow to a remote Indian island is defending his strategy in trying to reach the isolated people group. Authorities believe the people on North Sentinel Island killed Chow after he attempted to make contact with them this month. They're still trying to recover his body. All Nations leader Mary Ho says that Chow joined the organization last year and was well prepared. She said All Nations considered any health risk he posed to be minimal. Chow received 13 immunizations before heading out, and he quarantined himself for days.
No one knows the exact health condition of the people. And in past history, yes, contact with Western population has wiped out local populations. But we are actually in a different time of advanced medicine and antibiotics. And I think a lot of modern medicine may be able to help the local population in some of the health issues. We just don't know.
Senior national correspondent Gary Lane joins us now with more on this. Now, Gary, this story is certainly tragic, but also a reminder of how dangerous it can be for missionaries.
Extremely dangerous, especially if you have a zeal to share Christ with people who are hostile or potentially hostile. And that is what happened to John Chow. Now, he was a young man who just wanted the people of North Sentinel Island to know Christ. And for that, he paid with his life, Ephraim. He wasn't going to give up on that. He felt that, of course, he said that he didn't want to die, but he was willing to die because he felt it was important that God was calling him to do that.
And he knew the risk and dangers going in. Now, something like this happened before in the 1950s with a group of missionaries in South America?
Yes, and unlike John Chow, now Chow went into North Sentinel Island by boat in 1956. Nate Saint and Jim Elliott and 3 others went into eastern Ecuador, and this is from the movie End of the Spear. By the way, that movie came out, as you know, about 13 years ago. Wonderful story, but tragic as well. And they just felt a need. They flew into this area in eastern Ecuador, into the Auca tribe. At that time, they were called the Auca tribe, and brought Jesus to them. But with that, the tribal people turned on them and speared them to death, and they died. Now, we say this is a tragedy, but you know, God uses this to build his church. And guess what? The leader of that tribe, Ephraim, came to Christ after that incident. And so did other members. And of course, you get the tribal leader, then you get other members of the church, of the tribe that come to Christ.
So sacrifice their life to take the gospel. Tell us about another dangerous part of the world, the 1040 window and efforts to take the gospel there.
Well, the 1040 window is an area, if you look at a map, it begins in northwestern Africa, across Africa, northern Africa, actually the northern half of Africa, and moves into the Middle East, into places like Iran and Saudi Arabia. And then from there into Afghanistan, India, into Myanmar, China, and of course Japan. So that's the 1040 window, Ephraim. And those are people that are either Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, and mostly unreached people. people who've never heard the gospel. You'd be amazed. You go into places like the Hindu Kush Mountains, and there are people there who've never heard of Christ. They've never met a Christian in their life. It's very dangerous if you go into these areas, but also very fruitful, because many people in those areas, once they hear the gospel, will come to Christ. They're very receptive. People are afraid to go in, but once you go in, you find that the people are very warm and will come to Christ.
Can you share a little bit about just the heart of missionaries? I know you travel the world, you get to spend a lot of time with them. Just share a little their heart and why they do what they do.
Well, and I've worked for a mission group, the Voice of the Martyrs, for about 3 years. I can tell you the heart of missionaries is to serve and to share the gospel. They're evangelists first and foremost, but they want to serve as well. It's not just bringing the gospel, but going and living with the people, sharing the love of Christ, materially, providing material goods, and also spiritually, Bibles and so forth. So it isn't just bringing the gospel, but also demonstrating the love of Christ and being with the people that you want to reach and serving them, building relationship.
That's beautiful. Real quick before we go, how should we be praying for missionaries?
Well, missionaries have it very, I mean, not all missionaries. Some live in pretty good countries where they don't have the same risks, but we have risks right here in the United States. I met some evangelists who were beaten up just for sharing the gospel here in the U.S. But pray that God will protect them, of course, but pray that He will give them wisdom when they go into those areas that are difficult and risky.
Our government is caring for 13,000 immigrant children in federal shelters. Many are placed in massive group facilities that can only meet their physical needs, but some have been placed in family foster care. Our Heather Sells has the story of one couple giving these children love and comfort.
For the last 2 years, foster parents Silas and Corinne have welcomed immigrant children into their Michigan home. These children often arrive alone at the border, and the government oversees their care while it locates their families. Silas and Corinne received their training from Grand Rapids-based Bethany Christian Services. It's become a leading provider of family-based care for immigrant children. For almost 40 years, Bethany has helped kids showing up alone at the border. Then this spring came a new and surprising development. The children began telling their foster parents how they came with their parents and then were taken from them by the government. It was part of the controversial and short-lived zero-tolerance policy.
They didn't know that they weren't going to see their parents again in many cases. So these children were separated, they were taken, put in on a bus or an airplane, and they had no idea where they were going or what was happening.
Adam and Rachel's foster child told her counselor how she saw Honduran police shoot her grandmother. After the girl and her father fled to the U.S., she watched border agents take him away.
As a 4-year-old, she just had such a heavy soul from that and from just constantly reliving being torn away from her dad. And there was times where, it would crush her.
Under the policy, the government took 2,400 children from their parents. Today, almost all are back with family, either in the U.S. or their home country. Still, foster parents are in high demand because of children who come alone to the U.S. Right now, a staggering 13,000 are in federal custody. Bethany can only care for 100, so the government puts many of the kids in emergency facilities. This is a new tent city in Texas where 1,500 youth live while they wait to be reunited with family.
Kids should never have to stay in a tent city. Kids should never be apart from their parents. And it just shows you how desperate things are, that kids are hearing about this and the parents are still sending them.
We know in this country that children are best cared for in a family setting. That's what we do in our own domestic foster care setting. We don't place thousands of children who are in foster care in one large tent city, where we promote foster homes and foster care placement because we know that's what's best for children. These children are no different.
Experts blame government red tape for the high number of immigrant kids still in government custody. One reason, a new rule took effect this year requiring all members of a household taking in children to be fingerprinted. That has increased the wait time. Now the Trump administration has changed that rule, and there's hope that the number of kids in shelters will drop.
Obviously, kids being separated from their from their parents is not God's vision of the world. And so how do we step into the kingdom work that he has for us to solve that?
Corinne and Silas marvel at the resiliency displayed by their children and hope they can recover and receive what they need to someday achieve their dreams.
One of the little boys we just had, his dream was to be a firefighter or a police officer. So they have these big dreams, and we just hope that they get the opportunity to realize those.
Going forward, Bethany hopes to expand its foster program for the children who continue to pour across the border. It also wants their home countries and the U.S. to address the issues that caused their families to flee in the first place. Reporting in Grand Rapids, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Coming up on this Giving Tuesday, what motivates you to give? Stay with us. And welcome back to CBN News Watch. It is Giving Tuesday. We're all encouraged to give back. So what motivates you to give? For Christians, the Barna Research Group says emotions motivate charity. 62% believe they can make a difference. 45% heard a moving story. 38% find the purpose behind their giving. 34% have a relationship or know the person behind the mission or charity. Here at CBN, we have a family of ministries. Just one example, CBN's Orphans Promise has inaugurated a new soup kitchen in Mexico to help feed children in need and to offer free after-school classes. For years, they could not serve a larger amount of children because of a lack of a cooking facility. But now the new kitchen is ready and can triple the amount of recipients by providing hot meals to children. In addition, they also use Superbook to share the gospel with those children. You can visit our website, cbnnews.com, to learn more about Giving Back Tuesday and the work that God does around the world through CBN. And you can also partner with us. Thank you so much for watching this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember, we have more exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time and here at the CBN News Channel. Have a great day.